Okay, Parshas Pekudei Lamed Tes Lamed Beis. Vatechal kol avodas Mishkan Ol Moed, and all the work of the Mishkan of the Ol Moed was completed. Vayasum Yisroel kol asher tziv Hashem es Moshe, and the Bnei Yisrael did all that Hashem had commanded Moshe ken also. So over here, the Orach Chaim HaKodesh, if you have Mikros Gedolos, writes, V'yasum Bnei Yisrael hagam shlo oseh leBetzalel v'chachmei lev. It says, V'yasum Bnei Yisrael. It says, although Betzalel and only those who had the wisdom of the heart, they were involved in developing the components. But it says, V'yasum Bnei Yisrael, the whole Jewish people. So he explains, Shlucho Shalom Kaboso, that all the artisans who were involved, they were the agents of the Jewish people. The mitzvah was on the Jewish people to do it. And these people who were endowed with the special ability, they were the equivalent of the shluchim of the Bnei Yisroel. And we have a principle of shlich shom kamoso. The agent of the person is the equivalent of the person who he represents. Therefore, it's valued as if Bnei Yisroel, they all had done it. Hagam shlo mitzil shos Betzalel b'maimer Hashem Elohim shilchu. Says, although Betzalel, his involvement was only through Hashem's dictate, it's not they appointed Betzalel to represent them. Aval Pikin Hariskim Olav, but since they agreed that he should be the representative, therefore it's the equivalent as if he is their Shaliach. Okay. Odnira, another understanding he has, Kikan Osa Kosav Machberes Aklolos B'Kim Torah. This is the concept of Arevus, that Jews are responsible for one another, and as the Ramak explained in Torah and Devorah, that all Jewish souls are connected to one another, and whenever we bring anything positive into the network of Klal Yisrael, every soul is a beneficiary of that. So when these people actually completed the Mishkan, the benefit, the spiritual infusion, everybody was a beneficiary of that spiritual infusion, as if they all did it. Jews, they bring merit to one another. The Torah was meant to be fulfilled through the Jews as a total entity. For instance, Kohanim, what a Kohen could do, Yisroel is not qualified to do. And what a Levi could do, a Yisroel is not qualified to do. And what a Yisroel could do, a Kohen is not qualified to do. For instance, the Avoda and the Beis Hamikdash and the Mishkan, only a Kohen is qualified. A Levi, he has his specific responsibility. The Yisroel has his responsibility. So if that's the case, but if the Taryag mitzvos, all 613 mitzvos were given to Klal Yisrael, how does every Jew fulfill Taryag mitzvos? The answer is, the Taryag mitzvos were given to Klal Yisrael, and everybody's a beneficiary of everybody else. One entity. Therefore, everyone has his levels of ability and responsibility and capacity. As a result of that, in totality, the Klal Yisrael does Taryag mitzvos. So he's saying the same thing over here. Everyone has his level of ability and responsibility, and when each one participates on his level, Klal Yisrael are the beneficiaries of that level of participation. This is what the Orach Chaim is explaining. Each person does to his best ability, and when each of us does to our ability within our capacity, Klal Yisrael is doing the mitzvah. It identifies all Klal Yisrael beneficiaries of that. Give you an example. They speak about that supposedly there's a Rebbe Akiva Eiger that says that, Musaf, Shabbos, the Shachris Mincha Ma'ariv, the Gemara tells us in Brachos, are Ovis Tiknum. That corresponds to the Avram Yitzchak Yaakov. They legislated or they promulgated the morning, afternoon, evening service. Musaf is Keneged. That corresponds to the korban. That's the quote, bring the korban. Now, the Masa Shekel, which you just read about, last Shabbos Parsha Shkolim, who is obligated to give the Machzor Shekel? Only somebody from the age of 20 and above, a male above the age of 20 and above. Someone less than 20 is not obligated. Now, what were the Machzor Shekel used for? They were used for the Korbanei Tzibur, the communal offerings. That means anybody less than 20 did not participate in providing for the communal offerings. So it's cited that if that's the case, the Shlich Tzibur for Musaf, like on Shabbos, it's best not to send a boy who's less than 20 years old, because he's not a full participant in the Korban Tzibur, because he doesn't contribute to the Korban Tzibur, because only a person from the age of 20 and above participates. Therefore, we should not be sent to the Amud to represent the Tzibur. There's much discussion about this. However, even though he may not be obligated to participate, what about a woman? A woman doesn't give the Machzor Shekel either, regardless of how old she is. The obligation Machzor Shekel is only the male, not the female. So you mean to say a woman's not a beneficiary of the Korban Tzibur when the Talmud is brought in the morning and the afternoon, the Korban Tzibur or the Musafin. You mean they're not beneficiaries? Of course they're beneficiaries. Why? Because it's Klal Yisrael. Korban Tzibur means if it's a question of individuals, a partnership. What's the difference between a partnership and the Tzibur? Partnership means I have my share, you have your share. A Korban Tzibur means it's the Korban of Klal Yisrael. As long as you're a member of Klal Yisrael, you're a beneficiary of that Korban. Therefore, it doesn't really make a difference as long as you're a Bar Chiyuva, you're a person of obligation. He's 13 years old. He's qualified to dam for the Yomut, even though he doesn't participate in the Machzor Shekel, because it's not a partnership. It's not I have a share because I'm a partner. You're a beneficiary because you're part of Klal Yisrael. Just as a woman who doesn't give the Machzor Shekel, she is a beneficiary of the Korban Tzibur. Identically, the person who's less than 20, although he doesn't give the Machzor Shekel, he's a beneficiary. So there's no reason why he should not be fully qualified to dam for the Yomud. So over here, we're saying Tarek Mitzvahs. Tarek Mitzvahs will give it to Klal Yisrael. If Klal Yisrael fulfill Tarek Mitzvahs, each person does what he's supposed to do, we're all beneficiaries of that. Although we participate in the Avodah itself, or in carrying the vessels in the midbar of the Mishkan, whatever it was, doesn't make a difference. We pointed out in the past, when we speak about spiritual excision, whenever Torah speaks about a person is liable for kores, what does it say? Kores is your relation with Hashem is terminated. You cut off. Kores means you're severed. You're excised from Hashem. How does the Torah always express itself when it says kores? That soul will be cut off from its people. That soul will be cut off from the Jewish people. But if kores says you're excised from Hashem, you no longer have that relationship because of the degree of transgression, say, why it's me'amem Yisroel? So we explained in the past that the only person who has a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu is only close. So the only people who had a relationship with Hashem as individuals were Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, the patriarchs. And that was the concept of Hein Hein Merkava. They are the chariot. They are the location of the Shekhinah, because that was pre-Klal Yisrael. But once there's a Jewish people, the only one Hashem has a relationship with is only with Klal Yisrael. If you're a member of Klal Yisrael, you have a relationship with Hashem. If you're no longer a member of Klal Yisrael, you have no relationship with Hashem. And that's why the Torah, whenever it speaks about kores, it says, that soul is cut off from its people. Once you're no longer seen as part of the people, you have no longer a relationship with Hashem. Once you're cut off from Yisrael, you no longer have the relationship. Because you could only have the relationship through Klal Yisrael. As a result of the same concept, Tarek Mitzvahs will give it to Klal Yisrael. Every Jew, based on his classification, has his level of responsibility. As long as we fulfill our responsibilities, Klal Yisrael is doing Tarek Mitzvahs. But one individual is not able to do Tarek Mitzvahs, because there's certain mitzvahs which only have relevance to the Kohen and not to the non-Kohen, to the Levi and not to the Yisrael, or vice versa. As a result of that, Yibum, mitzvah of Yibum, that only happens if a person, his brother dies childless, there's mitzvah yibum. Everybody else has no relevance to that mitzvah, unless they experience that kind of experience. So how does one fulfill it? And the answer is no. It's when it actually takes place, as long as it's addressed and fulfilled properly, Klaus has done that mitzvah. That's the concept. The Rambam writes in Hilchos Yisodei Torah that if a Jew is Porshman at Tzibur, what's Porshman at Tzibur? The Rambam says a Jew keeps all the mitzvos, except he says, meticulously, the successes of Klaus are theirs, and my successes are mine. The problems of Klaus are theirs, and my problems are my problems. I have nothing to do with other Jews. I live as a sole individual. Rambam says, Ein lo chel klum abo. That's Porshman at Tzibur, Ein lo chel klum abo. So the question is, we're talking about he's a devout Jew. Maybe he's not fulfilling the mitzvah of V'ahavta l'recho kamocha, because he says their problem is theirs. He's not concerned, and his problem is his. And success, the same thing. But in every other area, he's fully committed to whatever the Torah says. He believes in Hashem, Torah b'Sinai, Yud Gimel Ikrei Emunah, the 13 tenets of Jewish belief. Yet he has no share in the world to come. The answer is because if you don't see yourself as part of the whole of Klal Yisrael, you have no relationship with Hashem. Olam Haba is you have a relation with Hashem. The only one who can have a relation with Hashem is if you're part of Klal Yisrael. Once you go and you sever yourself from Klal Yisrael, you don't identify. That's Porshman at Tzibur, Ein lo chel klum abo. This is the concept. And all souls are one entity. It's one network, and each of us are another component in this network called Klal Yisrael. So he says, you must love your fellow as you love yourself. What do you mean? He's he and I am I. But what about if we see all ourselves as part of the same entity? You have a body, you have a leg, you have various limbs and organs. Every one is integral to the other. We're all connected. If anything, an infection enters into the body, wherever, the whole body's affected. Negative, something positive enters in the body, the whole body is a beneficiary. So he says, kamocha, pirus l'tzadshu kamoscha, ki b'shlomo yetiv loch, because when he does the right thing, you will be a beneficiary of his action. And through he is your medium to be able to achieve a level of perfection within yourself. He's like part of you. You're part of him, he's part of you. Therefore, there's a mitzvah, that's the mitzvah of V'ahavta l'recho kamocha. And that's the way it's explained, the whole concept of arevus. Why do we have communal responsibility? For the same reason. And the Midrash explains it beautifully with this allegory. Two people are sitting on a boat, and one person starts boring a hole under his seat. His neighbor says, "What are you doing?" He says, what's the problem? It's under my seat, not on your seat. He says, yeah, but we're in the same boat. And if we go down together. There's a Midrash beginning in Nitzavim. Atem Nitzavim hayom kulchem. It's towards the end of Dvarim. Atem Nitzavim hayom kulchem. Kulchem atem Nitzavim. If you united, you stand firm. Im ein atem Nitzavim. If there's no unity among you, ein atem Nitzavim. We're only a Klal Yisrael which each of us complement one another. If we're not complementing one another, we're fractionalized, and you're you and I am I, then you're not Nitzavim. Then we're not beneficiaries of one another's. We don't recognize that we're actually here to complement and supplement one another. That's the Medrash. And the Gemara says, the Medrash is, L'moshel ma'adov adomer. Person has a twig, and you want to break the twig. You can easily break it. You take a bunch of twigs, and you want to break them all at one time, you can't break them. That's exactly it. One Jew can't stand alone. When you have the Jews united, and each one represents what he contributes, they could stand up, they could deflect any level of prosecution. That's the schus of Klal Yisrael. He says, "Ubezem otzonu nachas ruach ki Hashem tziva tayag mitzvos." Hashem gave us tayag mitzvos. He says it's not possible one person should fulfill all 613 mitzvos. Zeluchos, Kohen, Levi, Yisroel. We have three classifications of Jews. V'noshim, yesh mitzvahs b'kohanim shem mitzius liYisrael asosam. A Kohen has certain obligations which it's not possible for Yisrael to do. Yesh mitzvahs liYisrael shein b'kohanim, chen b'levim, chen b'noshim. Uma mitzius yesh liyochid l'kaimom lahashlim tikun l'ramach evorov v'shasagidov. So how do we do mitzvahs? We say mitzvahs correspond to every component of our neshama. As you have ramach mitzvahs aseh, corresponding to that, you have 248 parts to the neshama. Asher yechavdu lehem el avada shitzkaim haTorah b'machberes haklolos v'yizisku zel lezeh. Each one brings merit to one another. V'umasha amar kosav kam v'yasub bnei Yisrael kechol asher tziva Hashem kinu l'kulam yachad umasa kulam. We see that their actions are considered like we all did it. Hagam shevihem eviu hanedova, or some of them brought the material. Omehem also malocha, others did the craftsmanship. Yom al kulusam shosako, but together we did everything. V'samach maimer zel lemelech sabagodim asher osam al yechidim liYisrael ayuruch ikam al prat ze yom shosu b'nei Yisrael bein hevdel mi'at kol echad b'Yisrael hevi kol ayudgim luminim shebnedova. The 13 materials that were needed for the Mishkan, even though not everyone brought every one of the materials, but it's considered the equivalent as if we all brought, because since we're all part of Klal Yisrael, we're all beneficiaries of that action. Concept of chus avos. He says you find among Jews that a person is a tzaddik. Ultimately, it will repeat itself in the line. Meaning, one generation to be a tzaddik, there may not be, but ultimately, we find it comes back. That's based on schosovos. Among goyim, the non-Jews, you may have an EO, he was a tzaddik, but what he did has no relevance to his future generations in terms of repeating itself. But Jews, yes, and he says that's Yaakov Chevel Nachloso, just as a rope. A rope is a continuum. It extends itself identically when a grandparent, a great-grandparent does a mitzvah, it extends itself even into the future. And therefore, tzaddikim repeat themselves throughout the generations for that reason. Like a rope extends itself, the mitzvahs extend themselves beyond the parent. Okay? That's the Sefarno. But what's the concept? Every neshama, whether it was born or not born, every neshama, Jewish soul, was at Sinai. Every neshama at Sinai received its cheluk of Torah, its portion of Torah. Therefore, we all set and identify as components of this totality called Klal Yisrael. This was established at Sinai. Now it's just the question, when does it come into being, that neshama? What is the timeline? As a result of that, every component, your great-grandfather did something through Zechus Avos, since the system has been infused with that special Kedusha, that spiritual energy, and it's directly identifies with that component, so the component in the future, which has relevance to that original component, is a beneficiary of that component. Klaus is a total beneficiary, but I'm saying specifically Zechus Avos. It's because evidently there's a more direct linkage between a previous component and a future component. And all this was established at Sinai. But it's this concept. The Gemara says in Sanhedrin, Bara mizaka labo, but ain't abba mizaka lebro. You know what that means? A person has a child. The man didn't teach his child nothing. And the parent wasn't even a good Jew. And he has a son who's a tzaddik. Because the father had brought that child into this existence, and the son could not have been a tzaddik unless the father fathered him. The father is a beneficiary of all the good deeds of the son. That's Bara Mezakalaba. The son brings merit to the father. But if the father is a tzaddik and the child's not a tzaddik, when it comes to Olam Haba, the world to come, the father's good deeds do not contribute to the son. In terms of being in this world, giving greater opportunity, that's chosovos. If you have chosovos, Hashem will give you maybe a greater siyata d'shmaya, a greater divine assistance to be able to come upon certain things, a greater capacity. But in terms of the actualization of the mitzvahs, what the father did has no relevance to the son. So at the end of the day, when you evaluate a record, the record is evaluated based on your accomplishment. The father's accomplishment has nothing to do with the son. And that's what the Gemara says. Torah is not a Yerusha. Your father could have been the greatest Torah sage of the generation. If you did not study, you don't inherit the knowledge of the father. Each person is individualized. It's not a Yerusha. It's not passed down. The heritage is passed down. Then we have relevance to it. But the study itself, the knowledge, that's not passed down. That has to be studied. You have to study it. You have to be involved in it, in the process. Okay. Posuk V'Lamed Gimel. Vayaviu es HaMishkan el Moshe es Oel v'Skol Kelov. They brought the Mishkan to Moshe, all the various parts, its vessels, Krosov, Kroshov, Brichav, Amudov, Adonov, Vesmichse Oros Elim, the covering of the dyed hides, Avadomi Vesmichse Oros Hatchok Choshim, is Brochas Hamosoch. And all the various parts. Lamed Gimel, why did they bring it to Moshe? They developed all the components, but they couldn't erect it. And since Moshe was not involved in any of the melacha in the Mishkan, as we discussed in the past, therefore Hashem left that for him to do. Moshe was going to erect the Mishkan. Humanly, it was impossible to erect because of the weight of the beams. No one had the physical ability to set them erectly. Moshe asked Hashem, but if it's humanly impossible, how do you expect anybody to raise the beams? You go and be involved with your hand. Just put your hands under the beams, and it will appear as if you're raising the beams, but the beams will be raised by themselves. And that's what it says in the Pasuk. Hukam Mishkan. Hukam Elov. Does it say Hakim that he erected it? Hukam. Through him, it was raised. It was erected. Humanly, he said, the way if the beams were too difficult, and Hashem left it for Moshe Rabbeinu. I mean, Hashem could have performed the miracle on behalf of his Klal Yisrael. As it says, he endowed everyone with this wisdom and this ability. He could have given them the strength. And just as Moshe put his hands under, they rose to be erect. But because he Moshe, he says, because Moshe Rabbeinu did not participate, he wanted Moshe to put the final touches on it. That it should take on the form of Mishkan through Moshe's action.
Rabbi, your understanding.
Interesting. There's in Shulchan Aruch, there's something called Piskei Tshuva. It's a commentary there. It's a compilation of all discussion, response relating to what's stated in the Shulchan Aruch. So in Hilchas Nida, there's halacha that let's say a man marries a woman, and whenever he cohabits with her, it causes her to menstruate. And it's been determined, it's not she has some kind of wound in the wall of her uterus. So this is talking about menstrual blood. The act itself causes menstrual blood for the woman to menstruate. If a woman has this problem, ultimately he has to divorce the wife. He has to divorce her because he can't live with her. Because every time he engages with, she always becomes a nida. That's called Ro Damachlis Tashmish. If a woman always menstruates because of the act of cohabitation, but how do you determine whether it's coming from the uterus or it's coming from elsewhere? You go and there's a test to do it. You insert something like a cylinder, and you have a white cloth or cotton at the edge. So when you put it in and then you push it through the cylinder, so it doesn't touch the walls of the uterus, it goes straight to the source. And if the blood comes out at the tip, you know it's a problem. So in the time of Chazam Sof, they came up with a medication that the medication addressed this problem. But the medication was tested on Goyim, not on Jews. And it actually healed the problem. So once it's been tested by non-Jews, do we rely on their statistic? Maybe the physiology of the chemistry of a Jew is different than the chemistry of a non-Jew, which Gemara discusses. Gemara in Shabbos tells us that because the diet of a non-Jew is differently than the diet of a Jew, there's certain differences in the chemistry of a Jew than a non-Jew. For instance, the Gemara tells us that the Jews had to separate at Sinai the 3 days before Kabbalas Torah. Why? Because if they cohabited, the semen is viable for 3 days. Afterwards, it becomes putrid. And the only time semen contaminates only if a child can be conceived from that semen. So Gemara has a question. What happens if you have semen in a non-Jew's body? Theoretical question. Because they eat shkotzim and ramosim, they eat rodents, they eat all kinds of other things, the intensity, the chemistry of that woman will destroy that semen sooner, and it doesn't last for 3 days. It's not viable for 3 days. It becomes putrid sooner. Or do we say a Jew, because there's a certain intensity. A Jew has intensity because we have an obligation to do mitzvahs. Therefore, you find, they speak about, a Jewish woman versus a non-Jew Jew. It's a more intense personality. So the Gemara says, why? Because a Jew was given mitzvahs, and because we have mitzvahs, that puts at a certain level, our subconscious level, there's an intensity, because we have to be more focused. That intensity causes the semen to deteriorate. But maybe a non-Jew, it's more than 3 days. The Gemara has this discussion. So Chasam says, you see clearly that maybe just because it's been tested on a non-Jew, a non-Jew's body processes things different than a Jew's body. Can we rely on that statistic when it was proven among non-Jews, when the test studies were non-Jews? That's the question was asked in Chasam Sof. Chasam Sof says it doesn't make a difference. If it's been proven by non-Jews, these differences aren't going to make a difference. You definitely have a right to rely on it. And of course, if it still presents itself, you have a problem. But otherwise, you permit it. You don't have to be concerned that the woman will menstruate as a result of cohabitation. So I'm saying the Jew, in a certain way, we're only subject to natural things, and it's a pasuk in the Torah. If you adhere to my mitzvahs and my Torah, all the illnesses and diseases I brought on the Egyptians, I will not bring upon you. Meaning the Jews can be immune. There's going to be a certain divine protection that the world will be subject to this, and the Jew will not be subject to it. We merit certain divine protection that they don't have. In Middle Ages, when there was the bubonic plague in Europe, there were major pogroms. Why? Because the non-Jews were dying in greater numbers than the Jews from the Black Plague. So what did they say? So the priests in the church said the Jews, they cast a spell on the wells of the non-Jews, on the rivers, on the water sources, and that's why they're dying and the Jews are not dying. That's what the word they put out. And that's why the Mishmur says that when you go to Tashlach on Rosh Hashanah, you should do it outside the city. You shouldn't say Tashlach at the water cisterns in the city. Why? Because the guy are going to say the Jews that praying there, And if there should be anything negative happening, they're going to attribute it. The Jews, they cast a negative spell on the water. That's Mishmur says this regarding the laws of Tashlach on Rosh Hashanah. So if you go to say Tashlach, say it outside the city. So they shouldn't have what to say that the reason why there was this disease or people died was because they attributed to that. But the reason is, many reasons. The Jew himself had another level of hygiene. The Middle Ages, they lived like animals. Their hygiene level almost didn't exist. They never washed their hands. They never bathed. Everything, all the bacteria went in their mouths. As a result of that, their immunity was very compromised. The Jew, we wash multiple times every day. We rise in the morning. We do our bodily functions before we eat. Erev Shabbos, we go to the bathhouse. So a Jew had greater relevance to cleanliness than the non-Jew. Therefore, we were less subject. Besides, the Jew himself merits a certain divine protection if the Jew adheres to the Torah, which the non-Jew does not. Condition a woman is called a katlonis. You know what a katlonis is? It's called a killer wife. What's a killer wife? If a woman was married, everybody agrees to 3 men, and the 3 men died, even 2, nobody should marry that woman. Why? Because she has a record. She buries her husbands. We're not talking about she got married to a man who was 95 years old. The man didn't have much time left. But a woman's married, and every husband she marries, the man dies. So what is it? She's bad luck. So she's classified as katlonis. Katlonis means her husband's died due to be involved with her. And although we say normally chazaka is 3 times, but since it's pikuach nefesh, we're machmir, even it's a machlokas 2 or 3, but in regard to this, we're machmir after twice. If a woman buried 2 husbands, she should not marry, a man should not marry her if she buried 2 husbands. I mean, there's no isser, but the person's putting his life in jeopardy. Should not. So the Gemara has a shaila, why does the man die? Why does he die? Is it because it's bad mazel? Or is it because when a man has relations with a woman, there's certain secretions, the chemistry of a body, his body comes in contact with her chemistry. And that chemistry compromises the immune system of the husband. That's why the husband dies. Understand? That's the Gemara says this. So Gemara has a question. Is it just a bad mazel? As she says, she's bad luck. It has nothing to do with her physicality or her chemistry. No, it's the chemistry. Okay, these are side tidbits.